These creepy coincidences might make it seem like some planning was involved to make things line up so perfectly, but in reality, it was likely only luck, either good or bad, that made these weird instances happen. Number 10. In June of 1950, one of the most chilling coincidences in air travel history took place just offshore from the island of Bahrain. Just 48 hours apart, two Air France planes crashed in almost identical locations after flying near identical routes. The exact reason for these twin disasters has never been determined. The first tragedy occurred just after 9 p.m. on June 12, 1950. An Air France Douglas DC-4, nicknamed Ciel de Picardy, was coming in to land in Bahrain. The plane had started its journey in Saigon, modern-day Ho Chi Minh City, with a final destination of Paris. At the time, such long journeys weren't possible in one leg, and the plane had to make two stopovers. The first was at Karachi International Airport in Pakistan. No troubles were reported in Pakistan, and the plane took off without incident. 44 passengers and 8 crew members were on board. Bahrain, in the Middle East, was the second designated stopover. Between 8:42 p.m. and 9:15, the crew was in contact with the tower in Bahrain, keeping them informed of their approach and requesting permission for various stages of landing. Finally, the call came in to give the plane permission to land on a specific runway. For reasons unknown, the Douglas didn't make it to the runway. It hit the water just 3.3 miles short of the runway. What exactly happened wasn't immediately clear, but staff at the airport knew something was wrong. Search teams were sent out to try to find the plane and hopefully rescue any survivors. It took 8 hours before the Douglas was found, sitting in about 12 feet of water. Only 6 survivors were found. The incident made headlines around the world, even appearing on the front page of the New York Times. The possible cause of the disaster was a mystery, but some speculated it may have been due to poor weather. According to pilots, there'd been a sudden storm that hit Bahrain at precisely the time the Douglas was making its approach. Before any significant investigation into the disaster could take place, tragedy struck again. Air France was still running its Saigon to Paris route, with stopovers in Pakistan and Bahrain. Douglas DC-4 Ciel de Gascon was completing the route on June 13th, running about half an hour later in the day than the ill-fated flight of 2 days earlier. On board were 8 crew members and 40 passengers, including personnel from Air France, who were flying to Bahrain to take part in the investigation. As in the earlier incident, everything seemed to be going to plan until the plane was given permission to land. It hit the water just a mile away from where the other wreck had occurred. This time, there were 13 survivors. An investigation into both incidents couldn't say for certain what had happened. It seemed likely that navigation issues and pilot errors were to blame. Air France had only been making stopovers in Bahrain for about a month before the 2 disasters. Even though the pilots were both experienced, landing at the island's airport would have been new to them. Investigators also recommended better lighting facilities at the airport. A more recent investigation conducted in 1994, after the plane wreckage had been recovered, suggested that a weather phenomenon may have been to blame after all. They suggested a sudden microburst could explain both crashes. If that were the case, the 2 incidents would have been an even more unusual and unpredictable coincidence. Number 9. A weird coincidence led to a strange myth and confusion surrounding the connection between 2 completely different animals. The confusion lasted for centuries and had to be addressed by the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor. In the autumn and winter, people living in the far north of Scotland noticed a new bird among the fowl living near the ocean. These lived on the rocky shores that faced out into the North Atlantic Ocean, with the habitat earning them the name barnacle goose. The geese were white and black in color, with distinctive solid black necks and lighter bodies. What made the barnacle goose so strange was that people only ever saw the adults. The life cycle of typical birds is well known. People knew that most birds, including waterfowl, laid eggs, which would hatch into babies which often looked significantly different to their adult counterparts. but nobody in Scotland had ever seen a mating pair of barnacle geese produce eggs, nor had they seen any goslings. It seemed as if they appeared from nowhere as fully formed adult geese. In a strange coincidence, there was an animal that people saw in the same area during the summer months, when barnacle geese were nowhere to be seen. These weren't any kind of bird, but a crustacean. The crustaceans would be found clinging to driftwood that washed ashore, often in the very same places where the barnacle geese were found in the winter. The outer shell of these animals resembles the bodies of birds, with wings tucked close together. This on its own would have been a strange coincidence, but one that most people wouldn't have thought too much about. But when anyone tried to pry the shells away from the trees, they would find them attached by a long black stalk. This was called a peduncle, which has glands that produce an adhesive that fix the animals to solid objects. But to people in medieval times, they strongly resembled the necks of the mysterious barnacle geese. A theory was developed from this strange coincidence. Barnacle geese didn't come from eggs like other birds, but from this crustacean. The shells were presumed to be protecting the bird and would eventually form into feathers once the fully formed animal fell from the trees where they'd been growing. The crustaceans were given the name barnacle. Today, that name refers to the whole family of animals, while the specific creatures associated with the barnacle geese are still called goose barnacles. It seemed absurd that these geese might grow on trees, as the theory suggested, but no better explanation could be found. It also meant that the barnacle goose could be eaten during Lent, when meat was not permitted, but both seafood and fruit were. In 1215, Pope Innocent III issued an edict declaring that the geese were classified as meat. He didn't dispute the unusual origin of the bird, but stated the fact that it lived its adult life like any other seabird, and so it was a bird. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II also became interested in the geese at around the same time. After examining a goose barnacle, he concluded that this was a myth, and the geese must be nesting somewhere out of sight. The emperor was correct. Over time, people gradually came to the same conclusion, especially when it was confirmed that barnacle geese could reproduce with normal geese. Eventually, exploration further north revealed barnacle geese nesting sites in the Arctic, putting an end to the myth once and for all. Number 8. A TV show predicting the future once might be a strange coincidence, and one that might not even be noticed until looking back decades later. But for a show to predict the future so often, newspapers visit the writers when major events happen, that's much more unusual. The Troubleshooters was a British TV program that aired on BBC between 1965 and 1972. The show surrounded the activities of a British oil company called Mogul, and the people charged with getting the company out of problems. Mogul's troubleshooters were sent around the world to deal with problems as varied as political issues, internal company problems, and natural disasters. Almost every episode featured a new one of these disasters. 136 episodes were produced, so it might not be too surprising that some of the storylines mirrored the events of real life, but the accuracy the show writers showed made for some chilling coincidences. One of the earliest predictions to come true came in the Season 2 episode, When You Gotta Go. In the episode, Mogul is supplying oil for a water speed record attempt. The pilot attempting this daring feat loses his life, and the troubleshooters must figure out why and who is at fault. Less than a year later, Donald Campbell was attempting to break the water speed record when he lost his life after the boat backflipped and cartwheeled across the water. Campbell wasn't the first pilot to lose his life while making the attempt, so this chilling prediction alone likely wouldn't have attracted too much attention. BP, the company that Mogul was supposedly based upon, had sponsored Campbell in past land speed attempts, but wasn't particularly involved in this endeavor. But later predictions would gather much more attention. In a Season 3 episode, Mogul buys out a German chemicals company. The episode aired in April of 1967, but had been written and filmed much earlier. In January of 1967, BP purchased the chemical and plastics side of the distillers company. The purchase was major news, as these were two of the biggest British companies coming together, and appeared to be something the troubleshooter writers had seen coming. There were a few other minor predictions, which attracted enough immediate attention at the time that something strange happened in 1968. When the season 4 episode, The Day the Sea Caught Fire, appeared, a strange note was made in TV listings, saying, quote, "When the gas bubble exploded in the North Sea recently, every newspaper called the troubleshooter's office. They knew the series' reputation for forecasting events. Was anything similar planned? The answer, inevitably, was, we received the script last week." Once again, Mogul got there first. The most stunning prediction came the following season. Many episodes of the show were dedicated to trying to find oil in new locations, often filmed on site. On March 17, 1969, another of these episodes was aired. They've more than their assets frozen, focused on Mogul attempting to and finally finding oil in Alaska. The episode aired just 2 days after BP struck oil in the American state. Number 7. Julius Caesar's invasions of Britain may have been seen as some of the most influential things he did during his lifetime. The contact with the Brittonic tribes throughout Britain into Rome's sphere of influence paved the way for more permanent invasions in years to come. But the success of Caesar's very first invasion may have been down to an accident. The first invasion took place in August of 55 BC. Caesar had wanted to invade the year before, but had problems dealing with the Gaelic tribes that lived on the continent. This gave the Britons an extra year to prepare. When Caesar arrived in August 55, they were waiting for him. The invasion force had decided to land at Dover, but the deep waters there and the narrow beach made life difficult for the soldiers aboard the invasion fleet. The boats were run as close to the shore as possible, but that only provided the Britons on the cliffs above with the perfect opportunity. Projectiles were thrown on the soldiers while they stood aboard their ships, but rather than push over, the soldiers remained aboard the ships. Sudden storms that seemed to appear from nowhere had forced much of the invasion force to turn back or be blown off course. This included the cavalry. Caesar waited for several hours beneath the cliffs of Dover for the cavalry ships to arrive. It was already late in the day when the decision was made to go forward without them. But even after this decision was made, nobody aboard the ships wanted to be the ones to make the first move. It looked as if the invasion might be abandoned. If the soldiers were not put ashore that day, it was possible they'd be forced to turn back, and the invasion would be put off for another year. That would have given the Britons a burst of confidence and made them even more determined to defend themselves when the invasion force came back. They would know it was possible to repel the Romans, as they'd already done it before. In the face of this, one Roman soldier suddenly leapt from his boat. This wasn't any soldier, but the Aquilifer of the 9th Spanish Legion. He was the standard bearer carrying the sacred legionary eagle, and he was now headed towards the enemy. Seeing this, the rest of the legion jumped in after him to stop the standards from falling into enemy hands. It was just the momentum that was needed to send the entire army into the water and onto the beach. Caesar recorded the event in his account of the invasion of Britain. According to him, the Aquilifer would have given a rallying message to his fellow soldiers, telling them that they would have to go with him if they didn't want the shame of the standards falling to the enemy. He then leapt ashore to do his duty. This account has been shared for over 2,000 years, giving the impression that one brave but unnamed soldier spurred the legion into action. But historians aren't so certain that this is a conscious decision by the standard bearer. If the event happened at all, it was unlikely his rallying speech would have been heard by many of the soldiers aboard his ship. Instead, it seems more likely the entire thing would have simply been an accident. He may have fallen into the water, or dropped the heavy standard and leapt in after it. Realizing this accident could become a disaster, the rest of the army jumped in after, and the story of it being intentional was made up after the battle. Number 6. The Savoy in London, known for its luxury, has a history marked by coincidence. Two major events at the site occurred on the same date, 744 years apart. Named after Peter, Count of Savoy, a French nobleman, and uncle to England's Queen Eleanor of Provence, the site was granted to him on February 12, 1246 by Henry III. Located between the Strand and the River Thames, the land was highly prized. The resulting Savoy Palace became one of the city's grandest. The palace was destroyed in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, leading to a long period where the site held less glamorous buildings, including a hospital and a military prison. After another fire in 1864, Richard Carte purchased the land in 1878 to build the Savoy Theater and Hotel, intended to host Gilbert and Sullivan operas. The Savoy, the first public building lit by incandescent light bulbs, returned the name to one of extravagance, initially praised for its restrained style, later evolving into the classic Art Deco look. In a striking coincidence, the Savoy Theater was engulfed in a fire on February 12, 1990, the exact date the land had been granted centuries earlier. The fire, which started in the early morning, led to the hotel's evacuation, but was contained to the theater, destroying almost everything except the stage and backstage. February 12th once again marked a new beginning. The theater was rebuilt to closely match its 1929 Art Deco style, and it was reopened 3 years later, continuing to host performances. Number 5. Many minor coincidences occurred during World War II. One almost forgotten event happened before the war even officially began. Belgium, fearing a repeat of World War I, prepared its defenses against an inevitable German invasion. As in the previous war, military planners expected Germany to move through neutral Belgium to reach France, bypassing the heavily defended German-French border. Belgium had built up forts in Liege and Namur, but the Liege forts on the eastern border would likely see the first action. In preparation for the expected conflict, bridges across the Meuse River near Liege, including the prominent Valbenois Bridge, were rigged with landmines for sabotage. The aim was to slow down any German advance. Tragically, on August 31st, 1989, a thunderstorm caused a strange, unfortunate coincidence. A lightning strike hit the Valbenois Bridge as a train was passing over, triggering the mines and completely destroying the bridge. The train and nearby houses were damaged, resulting in 20 deaths and 24 injuries. The official start of the war in Europe came just 1 day later when Germany invaded Poland. Ferries replaced the destroyed bridge until a new one could be built. This small disaster gained a bit more notice due to another coincidence: an international exposition celebrating the completion of the Albert Canal, linking Siege and Antwerp, was happening nearby and had to be abandoned because the bridge collapsed. Number 4. The mysterious interstellar comet 3I Atlas, detected in 2025, has fascinated astronomers due to its possible connection to the infamous WOW signal. 40 years ago, the WOW signal, a powerful 72-second burst of radio waves, 30 times greater than background radiation, was detected from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, exciting those searching for extraterrestrial life. Despite the countless searches, though, no repeat of the signal was ever found. Atlas, only the third interstellar object in our solar system, is unusual. While mostly a comet, it displayed a sun-facing tail and survived solar storms. Most strikingly, though, its trajectory originated from almost the exact same region of space as the WOW signal, with speeds also sharing the same order of magnitude. This was first realized just a few years back in 2017. Astronomers estimate the chance of this spatial alignment being coincidental is only 0.6%, but the similarities are striking. Astronomers have confirmed Atlas is not artificial and has only emitted signals consistent with a normal comet, leaving its connection to the WOW signal an unresolved coincidence. For now. Number 3. Over 2,200 people were aboard the Titanic when it sank in April of 1912. That number was well below capacity for the steamship, but it was much higher than it would have been if it were not for unfortunate timing. Many of those aboard the Titanic lost their lives due to this unsettling coincidence. Just a month before the Titanic was due to set sail, in the north of England, the Miners' Federation of Great Britain had a vote. For years, miners across England and Wales had been trying to change the complicated wage system and install a national living wage. An attempted strike in 1911 went nowhere. But the 1912 strike would be different. More than 445,000 miners voted to take industrial action, and on February 28th, the strike began. What started as a local disruption soon spread across the country, but it wasn't long before Southampton was affected. At this point in history, Britain ran on coal. Not only did it power the large passenger ships like the Titanic, it also fueled trains that kept the country running and even heating systems in people's homes. The winter of 1911 to 1912 had already been a difficult one, and rising costs had forced many people into poorhouses. Even before the coal strike began, the cost of the commodity began to rise as people panicked and bought stock before it could be limited. Trains not having access to fuel were particularly damaging, as it meant other resources couldn't be moved around the country. Major companies and networks tried to purchase coal in advance to keep industry running while the strike was underway. Many shipping companies purchased coal from abroad. The Royal Mail Line would rely on coaling stations in the Azores, Tenerife, and Lisbon, while White Star Lines believed it would be able to stock up on fuel in America. According to reports, all available soft coal at New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore was being purchased by foreign steamers. Many transatlantic voyages were canceled, train routes curtailed early, and even cross-channel voyages were suspended. There was one voyage that White Star Lines would not cancel, though. It was made very clear that the Titanic's maiden voyage would go ahead no matter what. Other White Star Line vessels were docked in Southampton, filled with as much coal as possible so they could be loaded onto the Titanic. Many trips that might otherwise have had enough fuel to make their journey were canceled. As compensation, passengers were given tickets on the Titanic. This was often seen as an upgrade. A second-class experience on the Titanic was as good as a first-class one on any other ship. The strike would finally come to an end on April 6th, just days before the Titanic was due to sail. By this point, there was no time for enough coal to be brought down to Southampton for all the other vessels to be stocked, so passengers would have to make do with their Titanic trips. The strike also meant that the infamous ocean liner was well equipped with workers. Seamen who would otherwise have been aboard other vessels were desperate for work and signed up for the Titanic. This meant that when the Titanic tragically sank, almost every home in Southampton knew someone who was working aboard. Number 2. On March 11, 2011, a devastating earthquake struck in the sea off the coast of Japan. It triggered a tsunami which swept ashore and caused a nuclear disaster at the Fukushima power plant. For many people, the disaster came as a terrible shock, but for those who'd read an obscure manga, it sounded eerily familiar. Ryo Tatsuki is a manga artist who published works between 1975 and 1999. Most of her works were nothing out of the ordinary and were published in the serial Monthly Princess. In 1999, she was coming to the end of her career and decided to publish something a little different. Ever since 1985, Tatsuki had been keeping a dream journal. Some of her dreams were extremely strange, and years later, she would recognize similarities between those dreams and things that had happened in real life. This included the passing of Queen singer Freddie Mercury, which occurred exactly 15 years after Tatsuki had a dream about the event. Tatsuki had turned a few of these dreams into manga and published them in a few different regular magazines. In 1999, she decided to combine these already published dreams and a few others into their own collection under the title The Future I Saw. The Future I Saw remained relatively obscure for over a decade. It wasn't until after the March 2011 earthquake that people started to take notice. One of the dreams featured in The Future I Saw was an extremely destructive earthquake and tsunami. Not only did this bear a striking resemblance to what really happened, but Tatsuki also seemed to have gotten the date correct. According to the artist, she'd hit writer's block when trying to design the cover, which features pieces of paper with several prophecies on them. While she was struggling with this problem, she had another eerie dream. she learned of a white screen with the text, "The disaster will arrive in March 2011. This was what she decided to include on the front cover. People began to notice the eerie coincidence after the prediction apparently came true. Tatsuki hadn't just accurately guessed the date of any earthquake, but the largest one that Japan had ever witnessed. By this point, The Future I Saw was out of print, and Tatsuki lived a relatively private life. This allowed one person to pretend to be her and come up with other predictions about the future. Tatsuki would eventually come forward to denounce the fake predictions, and in 2021 released The Future I Saw, the complete edition. This was largely a reprint of earlier manga, but did include a few new dreams. Number 1. When two buildings of the same name both burn down, it might be seen as a strange coincidence. When it happens to 3 buildings, it can be easy to believe something more sinister is going on. Between 1851 and 1854, 3 buildings in 3 different countries were built, each given the name Crystal Palace. Less than 100 years later, not one of them would be standing, as fires burned through all 3 buildings. London's Crystal Palace was the most famous and the first to be built. It was originally constructed for the 1851 Great Exhibition and stood in Hyde Park. The building was entirely made from glass and iron and was unlike anything that had ever been seen before. The Crystal Palace was almost as awe-inspiring as the exhibitions that took place within it. After the exhibition, the building was dismantled and moved to South London, where it stood as the centerpiece of a grand park. At the time, it was the largest building in the world, and the owners hoped it would stand as a tourist attraction. Even though the name Crystal Palace became associated with the area, the building didn't see much success as an attraction. By 1936, many parts of the building had been abandoned or fallen into a state of disrepair. On the evening of November 30th, 1936, the manager noticed a small fire while on his rounds. He told his daughter to go warn the choir, which was meeting in another part of the building. As she did, the flames quickly spread. Within just 20 minutes, the flames had spread from one end of the building to the other, and in a matter of hours, the Crystal Palace was in ruin. The source of the flames was never determined. The gas company had allegedly warned of a leak before the disaster, which could have started the blaze. Other theories included a discarded cigarette butt or an electrical fault. While the London Palace and fire were the most famous, they were not the first. The first Crystal Palace to be reduced to ashes was located in Montreal, Canada. It was inspired by the building in London and built in that very same year. The Canadian palace was much smaller, and parts of the structure were made from brick rather than glass. It was originally built to welcome the Prince of Wales when he journeyed across the Atlantic to open a new bridge. Like its London counterpart, the Canadian Crystal Palace delighted at first, but didn't get as much attention as expected afterwards. It was moved to an area known as Fletcher's Field, where it would hold a few exhibitions. It was home to an indoor ice rink where the local hockey team practiced. In late July 1896, the palace burned to the ground after a fire started in a separate building. Firefighters rushed to the scene, although many were preoccupied with the fire in another part of the city. It didn't take long for the fire to spread, and little could be done to stop it. The Crystal Palace fire, with the most impact, was possibly the one that would take place in Germany 5 years before the London fire. Like the Canadian building, the Munich Glass Palace, or Glass Palace, had been inspired by the London Crystal Palace. It was originally built for an exhibition, the General German Industrial Exhibition, and opened its doors in 1854. Unlike its cousins, the Munich Palace became an important exhibition hall in the decades that followed. It hosted art from around Germany and beyond, and played an important role in solidifying Munich's palace in the art scene. Unfortunately, that only made the fire on June 6, 1931, even more devastating. Thousands of pieces of art were being hosted by the palace when the fire started. The museum's director general allegedly had to be restrained by the police to stop him from going back into the blaze to save artwork. Almost all the paintings, sculptures, and other pieces on display were destroyed, with only around 80 of the more than 3,000 surviving. In this case, many suspected that arson was to blame, but the spontaneous combustion of cleaning supplies was also a possibility. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.